Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. I wanted to welcome Tim Ulbrich, who is one of the founders of the Your Financial Pharmacist community. He's here today to talk a little bit about financial planning and a very specific type of financial planning for pharmacy professionals. So Tim, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast.
Excited to be back on the show, Tony. Thank you.
I first wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about what's been going on. I think it's been maybe 6 months since we've talked, but what have you been doing most recently? Let's do it in business terms. What have you been doing in quarter 3 and quarter 4 of 2018, and how are you doing here in the first quarter of 2019?
Yeah, it's been a fun ride, and I actually just had a chance yesterday. I was interviewing Dr. Blair Thielemeyer over from the Pharmapreneur Academy, BT Pharmacy Consulting, and we were talking about our business journeys and things that we're passionate about and legacy, and reminiscing a little bit of the journey of when we kind of both started our companies around a similar time. And you have that original vision and idea, and then you get into the grind of the business, and it's so refreshing to go back and think, why did we start this in the first place? And for us, it was a passion of helping pharmacists achieve financial freedom, going through my own journey, paying off a couple $100,000 of debt, making a ton of mistakes, grinding it out, making it way more difficult than it needed to be. We were really passionate about trying to change that story for other pharmacy professionals. And so for us, that was an evolution. We started with the blog. We started then moving into the podcast, the book 7 Figure. And then to answer your question directly, what we've been up to recently in the last couple of quarters is actually a merging of all the work that we've been doing around Your Financial Pharmacist blog and podcast, the 7 Figure Pharmacist book, the speaking that we've been doing, as well as the comprehensive financial planning that Tim Baker has been doing as a team member at YFP, but also owning his own business in Script Financial. And that now is all coming together hot off the press as one entity. So we are officially Your Financial Pharmacist, everything comprehensive financial planning, as well as the resources we have on the website, the blog, the podcast. And so that's been a journey. Personally, it's been very rewarding to see the vision of what was 3 years ago come to fruition. But it's also been a great learning experience, working with lawyers and accountants and tax situations and just figuring out all of the things that come with running a small business.
Well, let's actually talk about, that was Alex Barker that kept pinging in. He's writing another book. So I'm sorry about the two interruptions from the
Alex,
text.
what's up?
But what I guess I wanted to ask you about is when I keep reading, and we'll talk a little bit about the petition that just came out and the response and all of that stuff.
Yes.
But right now what I'm hearing over and over again is that pharmacists need more time and more money, because when you graduate from pharmacy school, I believe you get hit with the big 3. First is that you get hit with the student loans. 84% of students have student loans. The average is about 165. Is that about right? Somewhere
160. Yep.
160.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're at an age that you're going to start a young family or trying to start a young family. And we just hit a point where now we have this new paradigm of the 32-hour full-time job,
Yes.
which is not the best thing for a lot of people, or certainly wasn't what their expectations were. So can we talk about first, how does financial planning give me more money, and then how does financial planning buy me more time? So let's start with more money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to the point that you just highlighted there, Tony, that is exactly what we see. That's what I experienced in my life. That's what we see with our clients, is that we have a group coming out of pharmacy school that are strapped with student loan debt. And then we categorize it. I like your idea of big 3, but we categorize it as all these other competing financial priorities, right? So it's family, it's buying a home, it's feeling the pressure of, hey, I've been in school forever, I'm behind on retirement, I need to make sure I have an emergency fund, all of these things. And all of a sudden what was hey, I got an awesome income is now I feel like I'm living paycheck to paycheck. What happened to that income? Now, later on top of that, what is exacerbating that, is your point, is 32 being the new 40. And I think what is happening here, we've been preaching forever that in a perfect situation, you don't live off of your full income, right? You take some percentage of your income and say, hey, I'm going to graduate, and even if I'm signing for $100,000 or maybe what was 120 and is now 95, whatever be the case, I'm going to from day one live off of 70% of that, X percentage of that, because you never know what life's going to throw at you. And this is the classic example of why that's important. So here, it's the market that's dictating. You never know what's going to be thrown at you. But for other people, it could be that even as the market corrects itself in who knows how long, a few years, 5 years, 10 years, it could be an unexpected health event, right? It could be a sick family member. It could be, a family situation where a spouse wants to stay home with the child. Who knows what life will throw at you? And we preach margin, margin, margin. And when you live off of less than you make, you just have margin. And there are way too many pharmacists that are living paycheck to paycheck. And I'm not preaching because I've been there. And so I lived it firsthand. I understand the struggle. I understand the stress of what it was. And when you have margin, you have peace of mind. So where does financial planning fit in that? Financial planning helps you with a coach that helps you by yourself or you and or a significant other build a sound financial plan that looks at everything what we refer to as debt to death. So a good financial planner and a good financial plan will look at everything from student loans to budgeting to goal setting to emergency funds to home buying to kids' college to retirement, everything in between, all the way up to estate planning and making sure you're having all your T's crossed and your I's dotted in that regard. That is comprehensive financial planning. And what happens is when you start setting goals and you have a budget that's executing your goals and you start having and building an emergency fund and making sure you have the basic insurance coverage, not too much, not too little. You have a plan around retirement. You have a plan around paying your debt. Regardless of everybody's plan that is listening is different, when you have a plan, you have peace of mind. And when you have peace of mind, it gives you options in terms of what may be thrown at you, whether it's personal, career, or otherwise. So what does a financial plan do for somebody? It's that coaching, it's that accountability. And the myth that's out there, Tony, as you know well, is that good financial planning equals beating the market or returns. And it's not that at all. Data is showing again and again and again that good financial planning is about coaching and it's about accountability. Because at the end of the day, this topic is all about behavior, myself included. I need a coach. And if I don't have a coach, I'm not sticking to my plan. If I have a coach, I'm sticking to my plan. And my wife and I are in a much better situation, not only with our finances, but also with our marriage.
I got this YouTube video. I don't know how Google does it, but it was on the Dave Ramsey show, and this one couple, newly married, owed, I think, close to $900,000, $350,000 in student loan debt, $350,000 in personal debt, and some of that was credit cards, and then they had cars, and they were making $210,000 a year. How does this happen? And I'm not saying that specific couple, but because you can graduate from pharmacy school in 3 years, be done with your pre in 2, so it's possible to be a 22, 23-year-old with $200,000 in debt. If I were to go to the bank and I just went to high school and I worked, let's just say I had a job for 4 years or 5 years and went to the bank and said, hey, I'd like you to give me $200,000, they would laugh me out of the bank. But the government has said, hey, you know what? If you're going to get an education, we'll give you as much money as you need.
As much as you need, yes.
and what I think is happening is as much as you think you need. So tell me how this financial planning turns what we've called monopoly money into tangible money, or are people coming to you after they've kind of seen oh gosh, this just happened? Because I feel like I've listened to your show enough times that I've heard both, where I've got somebody that's maybe in school and it's like, whoa, it became real for me in school. And then there's other people who after school are like, what have we done? So
it's absolutely both. And you're spot on. Just today, I got an email from a student that said, hey, I'm looking at graduating, or I'm not looking at, I am graduating here in a couple months, and I want to get ahead of this, was her language. And so I want to work with you guys to kind of get ahead of this and develop a plan. Now, that's still somewhat reactive, right? But it's much more proactive than I ever was. So we do have some that are certainly in school or in residency and fellowship, and we actually offer comprehensive financial planning for residents, students, and fellows that are the third of the cost of what we do for pharmacists. So we're trying to adjust that accordingly. So certainly the more proactive, the better. But then we also have people that get to that moment of, wow, I'm in the $400,000 house. I have $200,000 of debt. I'm taking on credit card debt. Now I feel the pain. those decisions have been made, and now I need help getting out. So we certainly have both of those, and we service both of those. Of course, the preference is always to be as proactive as possible. But let me just add on, Tony, what you said. How do we get there is such a great question. And I think you nailed it. You and I have talked about the concept of monopoly money before, and that's true. I mean, whatever you need or think you need, as you said, to get through pharmacy school, and oh, by the way, at 7% interest, unsubsidized loans,
Oh, it's
interest that's
7%
accruing.
now. Oh,
Some of the loans are, and they're capitalizing interest, and there's lots of deferment going on, and all these things. But then there's also the ease of borrowing in the economy that we're in on the back end. So if you're a pharmacist right now that graduates with $200,000 of student loan debt, and you're making $120,000 a year, you can get a mortgage on a home with a 0% loan. Now, does that mean you should do it? Probably not. I mean, maybe in some situations, but even in the economy today, what we're seeing is the ease of borrowing on the backside for home buying and other things is becoming incredibly easy. So all of a sudden you look up, you're 25, 26, 27, you got $200,000 of student loan debt. The dream house is at your fingertips if you want it. You got a $400,000, $500,000 house, which here in Ohio would buy you a mansion, right? I understand
yeah,
that.
Same
That
in
isn't
Iowa.
true
Same in Iowa.
everywhere. And all of a sudden you look up, and to my point earlier, there's this sense of, I feel like I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And that is the piece that is so stressful. And that's the piece where either proactive or reactive planning starts to unwind that. And what we start with in our planning, and credit here to Tim Baker, is he is absolutely focused on starting with the goals and starting with the purpose and the why, because we know through the literature that if you can define the why in financial planning, you're much more likely to develop and stick to and achieve a plan that is focused on that why. So for example, he walked my wife and I through a process of really identifying for us what matters most. Because if we can figure that out first, when we get into the month-to-month budgeting, which is the grind, and we're really having a difficulty, but we can point back and say, this is why we're doing what we're doing, we're much more likely to work through that. If we start with the budgeting process, it obviously is very difficult. It's no different than when we're taking care of patients, right? I mean, if we are working with a patient who has been struggling with a chronic disease, obesity, smoking, whatever, if there's not a purpose or a why, they're much less likely to achieve their goal. We can tell them the plan all day long, but it doesn't mean they're going to be likely to do it, even if we're coaching them through it. So that process is incredibly important to how we address financial planning and the comprehensive nature, but also the goals-based, why-based planning aspects that we do.
So let's talk now about time. I know many pharmacists were maybe expecting to go into either a full-time position or what I would call a flexible part-time position where they could just pick up hours when they wanted to, kind of put the family in the center and then put the hours around it. And what I'm finding is that they're getting the opposite. They're getting floating positions where the job is in the middle. They're trying to scramble for childcare as, they end up working Tuesday, Thursday, then have to go somewhere for the weekend, come back, whatever it is. How does a good financial plan get you to a point where now you can actually have some stability in, okay, well, I only really need 20 hours a week now, so now I can spend the time with my family, or I can homeschool, or I can do those types of things. So can you speak to how being judicious over time buys you time?
Absolutely. And that goes back to, for me, the goal setting piece. So if we were to sit down, Tim Baker were to sit down with a client, whether it's Jess and I or whomever, and say, what really matters to you most? If he hears that being home with the kids, as one example, maybe it's somebody who wants to take a year off and travel the world. Maybe it's somebody that says, I really want to work hard so that I can save up X thousands of dollars so I can invest in real estate or buy my own pharmacy. Or, maybe I want to do this for 10 or 15 years and save X percent of my income so I can be a part of the FIRE movement and retire early, right? For everyone, it is so different. And that is not where traditional financial planning focuses. Is it usually focuses on, okay, you're going to work for 40 years and you're going to save 10% of your income, and we're going to get a nest egg of $2 million. And then we hope you're going to be healthy enough to enjoy it when it's all said and done. And for some listening, that may be the game plan, and that's okay. But the point is, it's been articulated that that's the game plan. And so that's where you're working from. But for many pharmacists I talk with, that is not the game plan. Maybe they want to do something different. Maybe they want to stay home with the kids. Maybe I want to travel, do all the things we just talked about. And if you can define that, then the financial plan becomes focused around that aspect. So if I sit down with somebody to say, hey, Tim, I really want to work 20 hours a week and I want to stay home with my kids or have the flexibility, or I want to own my own business and I need $100,000 to get there. Okay, now we look at everything else, spending patterns, behaviors, all these other things, and say, does how you're approaching this each and every month reflect your goal and what you want to achieve? And usually the answer is no, but I'm willing to make some sacrifices, whether that's cut expenses or better yet, also at the same time grow income, right? Side hustles, other things that we've talked about many times before on our podcast. So a good financial planner is not just taking a cookie cutter approach and saying, okay, Jane or Joe or whomever, regardless of what you actually want, and all of you being different, we're going to do this, but really sitting down to say, what are your number 1, 2, or 3 goals? What matters most? What's your why? And then wrapping the financial plan around it to develop the approach to get there. And that begins, again, the why, the goals, the budgeting. And then one of the things I love that Tim Baker does, and when you talk about time, I also think about saving my time, as an individual, in addition to knowing my own needs, is he works through a process with a goal savings worksheet where after we work through our whys and our goals, we actually list out our goals. We list out what amount we need to fund those goals. We list what our current balance is. We set up separate accounts, and then we put that plan on automation to fund those goals. So, for example, when I log onto my long-term savings account right now, I've got a section for emergency fund. I've got a section for vacation, home improvement, real estate investing, all the things that Jess and I are trying to work on. And then as a part of the process, we're automatically funding those and we're tracking those each and every month. Without having somebody coach me through that process and keeping me accountable, life's busy. I'm just not going to be doing that.
No, I I absolutely agree, and I won't go into my financial situation, but we're doing fine, but we certainly have very little plan. My wife has started doing some of the things that you're talking about, but we've never really taken a comprehensive why, and maybe that's something that we definitely want to look at. But she threw out the first number for summer vacation, and I think it was $10,000, and I about lost it. And she's like,
"You do have 3 kids, though, right?"
Three, so yeah. You take them to the park, and it's $1,000 for the week, and you're just, I mean, I almost choked, which is, we need me alive to get that income, but
to write more books.
Yeah. But that was kind of a shock to me, and then we've gotten it down to 7,000 or whatever it is. But that vacation, that one vacation for sure, is a non-negotiable, and then the one vacation we have during spring break or part of spring break is a non-negotiable. So we have some of those fragments of why. Can you talk me through? I guess when I think the person's coming to the financial planner, their first thought is, okay, what stocks are we going to pick? What stocks versus bonds are we going to pick? How am I going to make sure I don't lose my money? And then if somebody says, okay, well, let's back up. Let's first figure out what you're earning your money for. And I think that's going to be kind of a shock. And I think that's where my wife and I would want to start in our financial journey as we start to move together, although we've been married 11 years. I think how does that conversation go? Because I think when people are saying financial plan, I'll get to it. But I think what would drive me to actually go talk to someone, to actually go to a financial planner and say, I really do want to have a time where me, my spouse, and a neutral intermediary is there to protect us both from each other, and make it kind of a civil conversation. But how does that conversation go? Or can you talk more about how that conversation went with you and Jess, or maybe some of the clients that you've had? Because I think many couples would go, oh my gosh, that would be amazing if we were both on the same page.
Yes. And this is top of mind, Tony. I just finished up a webinar the other night titled Love and Money, How to Successfully Navigate Your Finances with a Significant Other. So this is on my mind as of this week. But I think that what I have seen with both Jess and I and others is that while people may not always come into the relationship with the planner with that in mind, they find that experience just incredibly rewarding and refreshing to say, in my case, Jess, I had no idea you felt so strongly about what we're doing with the boys in this way. And having that objective third party is just giving me a different appreciation to hear her say what's most important to her and how differently she approaches money from me, and how we can then articulate a plan and a compromise to get there together. So that conversation facilitator between two people is priceless. But just even taking a step back from that, let me be fully transparent with your listeners, and we say this to our listeners as well. We firmly believe that investing is only one part of the financial plan. And that is true according to just the fundamentals of what actually defines a financial plan. So there's the piece around developing a spending plan and insurance and estate planning and managing debt and credit and all these other parts of investing plan. And what the reason why people typically think financial planner equals investing and picking stocks and the right bonds and all these things and beating the market is because that's how the industry is typically paid. And the reality is that it's one part of the financial plan. So if somebody's looking for that, we are not the best fit for them. We're going to do that, but we're going to do that as a part of the rest of the financial plan and making sure we're looking at the whole thing in some, because for so many of our clients in our community, they have to start with the foundation. If they're $200,000 in debt and they've got all these other competing priorities that we talked about at the very beginning of the show, then yes, we're going to think about investing, but we have to think about all these other things, or we're going to be 1 or 2 or 3 steps ahead of where we need to be. So let me just kind of give you an idea of what this why process looks like. And we actually recorded it. I think if I have this right off the top of my head, it's episodes 31 and 32 of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Tim Baker, we recorded this session live where he was interviewing Jess and I. And he walks through a process of asking some very challenging questions that, again, gets you thinking as an individual, but also gives you a chance to hear from a significant other if that's applicable. So these are questions like, hey, imagine, Tony, that you're financially secure. You have enough money to take care of your needs now and in the future. How would you live your life? What would you change? Anything? Would you change anything? Now imagine you visit your doctor, tells you only have 5 to 10 years to live. You won't ever feel sick, but you'll have no notice of the moment of your death. What will you do in the time you have remaining? Will you change your life, and how will you do it? And then finally, you find out that you only have 24 hours to live. Ask yourself, what did you miss? Who did you not get to be? What did you not get to do? Who do you wish you would have spent more time with, and do you have any regrets? And some people hearing that may think those are cheesy, but when you actually answer those out loud, you hear yourself saying, this is what I truly believe. And then you reflect on, this is how I'm living each and every day. And for us, there was a big difference, right? And so once we define these and we get specific, now every time Jess and I sit down with Tim, he says, okay, tonight we're going to talk about this part of the financial plan. But hey, remember 2 years ago, you guys said spending $10,000 a year on a vacation to take your boys out to see the orca whales or to go to the Sierra Nevadas was really important. What are you doing to actually make that happen? Is this still important? And with young kids and how life is, all of a sudden we're like, oh, wow, like we've lost sight of the priority, right? We need to get back to the why, and we need to make sure our monthly budget reflects that. So that is the power of both the why, but also the power of having an accountability and a coach to hold up the mirror and say, hey, you guys said this was important. What are you actually doing about it?
Yeah, I've heard the expression, those who aim at nothing hit it with amazing accuracy. And it sounds like that's what happens to most people when there's no plan. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of leads us into what I will just call as the petition. I'll give some backstory on this, and I'll give my opinion. You can give your thoughts as you feel. But my biggest concern with this petition is giving away power. So if you haven't heard, there's 14,173 people have signed this petition that says halt accreditation of new PharmD institutions in 2030.
Wow, that was 3,000 last week.
Yeah. So it's picked up steam or whatever. But again, that's kind of a false number because there are 350,000 pharmacists. So it doesn't say 14,000 have signed. 335,000 have not. So it's kind of one-sided in that way. And what I first want to do is I want to acknowledge the anger. There's a certain expectation that if you go into a professional school that a number of jobs and opportunities will be there for you, and that schools will be working together as a collaborative to make sure that those jobs are there for you. But in the response, which both sides are very professional, hey, this is what I think, and the response was basically, we can't do that legally. But to actually go into the response a little more, I felt that what they were trying to say was, we had no idea things would go this badly, this quickly. At one time, they said we need hundreds of thousands of pharmacists from the Pew Commission beforehand. And so I think both sides are not really listening. They're just talking. And so many times My wife is very much someone that I have to watch her expression, because I can say the same word and it means something different depending on my tone. And a lot of times I'll say, "What did you hear me say?" And I feel like two people are just coming together to talk, and they haven't actually talked very much before. And so the conversation's going and all of that stuff. But this is my one takeaway from this petition, which is, if you are trying to change someone else's behavior, it's a heck of a lot harder than spending the time to change your own behavior. So if you work on your own behavior in both spending and earning, I think you'll have much more success than you would. Let's say it does go through today. I don't see that would necessarily help anyone right now today, but spending a couple hours on working on a new business, spending a couple hours budgeting, spending a couple hours finding a why, finding a financial planner, all of these things that you could spend an hour on, I think would move you forward. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts. You're a faculty member, so but you're also a dad, and you're also a pharmacist, and you're also speaking to people across the country.
Yeah, this one's tough for me, Tony, and I think that here's my quick thoughts, and I could talk about this for an hour and a half, and obviously I won't do that or bore your audience with it. I think what's happening, to the point that you made about people not listening, is that there hasn't been a good constructive venue for discussion on this topic. And I'm not going to point fingers at anybody. I think there's blame to be passed around in many different areas, myself included. I think we should be a facilitator of conversation and allowing people to share when they're upset about something, but doing so in a constructive way that we can have a conversation that's informed and that we can move that forward and try to make some real change. And in the absence of that, what is happening is largely a conversation that is not always informed and that is always not productive. And that is leading to pointing of fingers, and we ultimately get nowhere. Or I think, and to be fair, we're probably taking some steps backwards in some situations. Now, what I think is happening, and I agree with, is there's frustration coming that is driving this petition, that is because in part of financial situations and student debt and all of that, which is fair and is realistic. We're seeing a cut of hours that we talked about. We're seeing a saturation of the market in some areas. Although if you look at the national data, I think the tone around that doesn't fully represent what actually the data is showing in terms of the supply and the demand. And I think that's happened much faster than people had thought it would. And so that is getting to a point of boiling over and frustration. However, and I agree with that point. However, if you look at the petition, there's some specific issues that I have with the petition. It calls out for something that isn't realistic. It calls for APHA and AACP to put a hold on accreditation. Neither
but that's ACPE. Right?
Correct. And even ACPE, as many people may or may not know, ACPE is responsible for setting the standard and making sure people meet the standard. They cannot make a decision about can a school open or not. That is up to the state in terms of the state approving that school with their Board of Education. So ACPE has an accreditation standard. Everyone can read them. The latest standards are ACPE 2016. That's the standard. So if I'm a new college and I want to say, hey, I want to start the Tim Ulbrich, Tony Guerra PharmD program, we have a standard that's been set out there. And if we do everything we need to do to meet the standard, they have to objectively measure us against the standard. If we meet the standard, we're accredited, and we can open up our doors. Now, supply and demand and economies of scale, all those things will determine whether or not we can be successful. So they are tasked with setting the standard. So can they increase the standard, make it more difficult? Is that a way they can control some of this? Of course, that could be one option. But what's happening, if you look at that petition, there's blame going around and saying APHA and AACP, the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, you should put a 10-year halt on the accreditation. They have no authority to do that. Now, what they do have authority of doing is they have an authority to initiate a constructive conversation, which is, I think, what we all should be doing along with the colleges and the professional organizations. So again, that goes back to the point of being informed and who really should be leading some of this discussion and this change. The other thing that I struggle with in that petition, Tony, is that it really pointed blame on the new colleges of pharmacy. And when you look at the data, if you look at the data in terms of enrollment and growth, there was a lot of growth that happened during this time period of existing colleges of pharmacy that increased their class sizes. So if we're going to point blame in that direction, I think we need to point it in a way that's fair. And I think the new colleges have taken a lot of flack in a way that is not fair. There's a lot of schools that increase class sizes, double class sizes, added branch campuses and other things that at the time the market justified, and we're now seeing shifts and changes of things that are happening, but that petition didn't fairly represent that. So my call to those that started the petition is to say, I agree with your frustration. I recognize it. I acknowledge it. We see the trends that are happening, but let's have an informed discussion on a path forward in terms of who can actually facilitate the change, and where is the blame to be pointed, and what are some constructive solutions. And I think there's just a whole counter argument that is probably outside the discussion here of our time together, is to say that the market, will it just correct itself and take care of itself? And is it acceptable to let that play out, or does there need to be something that needs to happen in terms of an intervention? One last thing I feel like I need to say, Tony, as an entrepreneur on this topic, is that I feel like out of frustration is coming very much a tone of a victim mentality. And I know I'm not going to get popular at that. I'm probably going to lose a lot of people following what we're doing. But to me, it's mindset. And it goes back to having your personal financial house in order. It goes back to, approaching your day job and looking for opportunities. But when your back's up against the wall, things become very, very challenging. But I think as I read the tone of that, I don't read as much of a tone of what can we be doing in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship and expanding opportunities, and how can we reinvent the role of a pharmacist in this space and be pursuing alternative billing opportunities and different revenue streams and all of these other things. It's very much a mentality of, and I think out of frustration that isn't always fair to the people that are bringing it forward, of that, I graduated and I have 6 figures of student loan debt. I've got $200,000 of student loan debt, and I see my income is dropping. If we look historically, and I think you've talked about this before, the inflation of a pharmacist's salary is like we've never seen it before. I mean, I remember interning in 2001 at Eckerd Drug in Western New York, and my pharmacist was making, I think, in the low 70s at the time. So inflation has not happened at the pace where salaries went up to $120,000, $130,000. But to be fair, the other side of that is, because I think of that, and because of the supply and demand, we're seeing student indebtedness grow at a pace that is way more significant than it ever was before, that exceeds other health professions, exceeds inflation in a great way. And so I think there's that counter argument that some people feel like, well, because of that supply and demand in the market, that we saw the indebtedness grow, and now we're facing this situation and we're seeing our hours get cut, salaries get cut, and obviously the challenges that come from there.
Yeah, there is one bit of irony, though. The accreditation, this petition, has the sending it to David Allen, who I believe is the current president of AACP.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And somebody who I actually respect greatly, a former dean of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I guess was just ironic to me was David Allen is the president now of the University of Mississippi, who just got the most recent pharmacy school. And although that new pharmacy school is really in the New Orleans market, with Louisiana being so far south in Mississippi, but you're basically telling a guy who just had a pharmacy school go open up in his backyard that they shouldn't have more pharmacy schools. So he's like, well, I'm dealing with it too. So we're kind of on the same side. I wish we could actually be on the same side and work together. So
Tony, what do you
see
though?
Happen.
Do you feel like this is something that it'll correct itself? Do you feel like we're overinflated in salaries and we're now just seeing that return to a level that's normal? Are we going to see people taking entrepreneurial risks? You're in on this topic, I feel like, probably more than I am. I mean, where do you see some of this going?
Well, I can tell you, because so as somebody who teaches at a community college, I see the freshmen and sophomores in the pre-pharmacy versus the pre-med, and I know what the numbers are from last year to this year in terms of pharmacy applications or applications to pharmacy school, and they've dropped exponentially. So the correction is coming, and it's going to be there. But this is my prediction, and this is my sole prediction. I believe we're going to see mergers because we have seen it in community colleges, where community colleges have shut down and their students have become part of another school. Mm-hmm. You see this in Europe, a couple of schools. Ireland, I think, has had this happen, a number of other places. So I think pharmacy schools are going to absorb other pharmacy schools, but still provide access. So again, many of the new ones are faith-based. Many of the new ones are in underserved areas. Many are near homes of the students that they serve. And I know Ohio, like Tennessee and California, has a very large number of schools. But when someone from outside Ohio looks at Ohio, and I was just listening to this on a book, someone says, "Oh, well, that's just Ohio." But an Ohioan looks at Ohio and says, "No. Ohio is not just Ohio. There are different divisions." So in Iowa, we have central Iowa, northern Iowa, eastern Iowa, to some extent western Iowa, which is part of Nebraska. But to someone outside, it's just Iowa. So how do you see your own state? What states are there within the state? And how did the pharmacy schools serve those different ones? I know that Columbus is the center of the universe now, but besides the Ohio State University, can you maybe explain, like in your state, what's the difference between the state? What's the difference between those schools and what they're serving? Because I think they actually do serve their own unique markets.
Yeah, I agree. And not being born and raised in Ohio, we might have some Ohioans that correct me. But being here for more than 15 years now, I feel like I fell in love with this state and the community. And I'm still working on the for Ohio State. So I'm getting there. People keep reminding me about that. But yeah, we are seeing that. And it's interesting. If you look in Ohio, we have 7 colleges of pharmacy. And one of the things I loved about my previous employer, Northeast Ohio Medical University, when they started, is I really feel like, again, where a lot of schools have taken a lot of flack, they started out of a very true geographic need. At the time, there was no colleges of pharmacy up in the Northeast and none on the eastern half of the state of Ohio. So there really was a huge market. You think about the practice that's going on in Cleveland with Cleveland Clinic, UH, Akron General, all the partners there, Mercy Health. There was a serious need in terms of providers, but also just the influence the college has on practice is very significant. I saw the evolution of pharmacy practice in Northeast Ohio happen in a significant way, in large part due to the university and the influence that it had in the area. So certainly, we're seeing a lot of saturation more so here in the Columbus market than in more rural areas. So, as I think about the areas of Ohio, of course, you've got Northeast Ohio. You've got Northwest Ohio, predominantly looking at the Toledo area. You've got the Dayton market, which is thinking of the schools, Cedarville. One of the challenges we're seeing up Northwest is up in Northwest Ohio. You have my alma mater, Ohio Northern University, Findlay, and the University of Toledo, all within about an hour of each other. So I think that's a challenge going into the future. And I agree with your assessment nationally about maybe some mergers and things happening. Where we have, believe it or not, a huge gap in healthcare, and I think Ohio State is doing an incredible job of tapping into this, is in Southeast Ohio, rural Ohio. Along the Ohio River going into West Virginia. We have a partner in OU that is obviously strong in other healthcare programs, but does not have a pharmacy school. So partnering with them on pre-pharmacy, and I would argue the part of the state where there's the most desperate need for healthcare in being rural and underserved populations is the one place where we don't have a college of pharmacy. And that's in Southeast Ohio. So I think there's a huge opportunity for practitioners that are willing to pick up and move, looking to evolve and start new practice models, start new business opportunities in other areas that are saturated, maybe because everybody wants to live, within 10 minutes of 20 minutes of downtown Columbus. Like one of the things I think that just has to change about the market is that I often, and to be fair, I felt this as myself as a new graduate, I'll often hear of, I want to live in this one city. Well, what we're finding is that people are willing to be flexible, at least for a short period of time. There are opportunities that are out there. And I think that flexibility is a key piece for new graduates right now.
Okay. Well, I've asked you a lot of questions. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you definitely want to get out there?
No, I enjoy just coming on your show, and I enjoy following you, and you're somebody I really look to as kind of a thought leader in what's happening in pharmacy. So I look forward to collaborating more in the future. And just to build off of our discussion about planning, this week is for us the official launch of YFP planning, which is really exciting. So if people want to learn more, as always, you can go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or our official site for the planning aspects are yfpplanning.com. So thanks for having me on the show.
All right, great.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.